Well, good morning, everybody. I wanted to start us off today by looking at yesterday's severe weather reports from the Storm Prediction Center. As it stands, we're approaching 300 reports of severe storms, and in these was a lot of hail, and we did have 18 reports of tornadoes. There were actually two separate complexes of storms we watched yesterday, a set that went through parts of Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois, and then along the main frontal boundary stretched back in through here, which is kind of a combination of an upper-level front and dry line. We saw some very large storms producing not only tornadoes, but also more very large hail. To show you these on satellite, just take a look at this. This starts midday yesterday and just plays through right around sunset. And here's the first storms that erupted. It's kind of interesting to watch this yesterday as some of the storms that popped like near Peoria ended up abandoning their updrafts, just leaving the anvils kind of scattered here, moving out of Illinois and Indiana. But the storm that did hit Chicago was quite large, produced some larger hail. But on the back side, about the time we got, about 5 o'clock and after, we started to watch the main frontal boundary, kind of really driven here by the dry line, start to produce just a series of very large storms. And some of these, again, produced tornadoes. Some of them produced some very large hail. And I'm sure you're going to see today on the news a lot of reports of what these tornadoes look like. Synoptically, though, the bigger picture, we can see sand from the White Sands National Forest here getting blown out of New Mexico towards Texas, and a lot of this dust here just tells us how dry things are. On the northern side of this, very heavy snows, as we talked about, coming out of Montana, hitting parts of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, and this low is still sitting and spinning in this area now. In fact, if I just kind of play this forward, this is where the sun was just rising this morning across the east. We can see that that low has not moved very far, and we're still watching a complex of storms rolling through this particular area. So we're still dealing with the storm system today, and we're going to get our round two of it here in a few moments. But I do want to show you, it's kind of neat just to look at this on satellite. Zooming in on Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, we can see the storms erupting. You can see the dust on the back side of this, but actually, while it's fascinating to see the overshooting tops and the gravity waves on top of this, I want you to see what happens once we flip over to infrared. So the darker red in here versus the darker grays versus the lighter gray, it's actually showing us where the cold pool is spreading away from some of these storms. See this? So this is that colder air that's generated in the downdraft that pushes out. And then what's interesting is behind it, we saw the next wave here. Can you kind of see the lighter gray pushing in? And through this morning, we now have this new boundary that initiated the next round of storms. And you can see that boundary pushing all the way down here. So just a fascinating view of what these storms did and kind of seeing the temperature contrast. Now, this is much, much colder air that's pressing through here. And I was even looking this morning at the service observations in this area. So this is kind of how we distill down all of the information collected by what we call our ASOS stations, Automated Service Observing System, across the country. So early this morning, you can see where the low is currently spinning here, the surface low that's down in the central plains and the frontal boundary, long dry line stretching right in through here. We're on one side, let's just pick a station in Oklahoma. It's 70 degrees Fahrenheit over a dew point of 60. On the other side of Oklahoma, the temperature right here, 47 with a dew point of 30. And that, that dry line, that boundary between the humid air coming out of the Gulf and the very dry air that comes off of the Rocky Mountains, especially the desert Southwest, is positioned right here today. Now, this is a map we got to come back to in a few moments. But first, how much precip did we get out of this? Let's see if we got a new update on this. There's the 6 a.m. data. So again, several of these storms ripping off a lot of hail, but there was some heavier rain. And this is now the second time this in a week that we've seen rain getting into the eastern half of Kansas. On the backside, this was all snow. All right. And if we just take a look, this will update later today, but even through 7 o'clock last night, we can see how heavy the snows were up against kind of the foothills here of the Rockies and Montana. But then right there, this is the heavy snow corridor, which we talked about would be along, the 49th parallel here. So all hazards weather map today still have the winter storm warnings out for this area. Red flag warnings spreading out of New Mexico to Missouri. And then out ahead of this system, you see them stretched here from, parts of Tennessee into Ohio. And strong winds with this system. And remember, it's still going this morning. I was looking at some live lightning data. This is recording about 6 o'clock this morning. And we can see where those storms have moved into Iowa, Missouri, still coming out of Kansas, but the last round of them coming into Oklahoma. All right, so later today, this is what the frontal boundary is going to look like. So remember, we have these two lows. This is the one to the north here and the one to the south, and there's the main frontal boundary. We're actually getting some very interesting surface deformation along this, and that's going to set us up with a relatively strong front, which is going to continue to grow throughout the day today. And it'll be along this frontal boundary, stretching from Texas into Missouri, that we're going to keep an eye on the risk of those severe storms again today. All right, this could stretch up into Illinois, and we could see some storms as far north as Wisconsin out of this. Tomorrow, as that front sags, we're going to watch the Gulf Coast from Texas down into Louisiana, Mississippi. And then as we get into the day on the 22nd, we will be watching here for the Carolinas for that front to finally make it into this region. So let's go talk on the northern side of this. I was just playing this morning from the European model 0Z run, how much more snow we're talking about here. And just to watch this system through, I just played this out to early Monday morning. We do have the potential in through here of picking up better than 8 to 10 inches of snow. It's going to be a very difficult liquid to snow ratio, but there's kind of identifying where this heavy snow corridor is going to be. And some of this will be draining into the Red River of the North, and some of this will be draining into the Mississippi and its tributaries. That's why it's important for us to just be reminded that these two river systems are still very much in their flood stages. And this is just showing you all of the river gauges right now that are in some form of flood stage. We have 168 gauges across the country that are. So we're going to be adding more to this area that will melt and continue to keep that flood threat going. Okay, let's take a look here at the high-res NAM first, just to get an idea on the timing. I'm starting this at 7 a.m., about an hour after I record this. And models, I think, were initialized pretty well on the position of the lows and what was going on here. So as we play it forward, this is the cold rain that's going to spread out ahead of this into parts of Minnesota, with rain coming into Wisconsin and Illinois this morning. This is by noon. You can see the snow on the backside of this, possibly getting down here to Sioux Falls. We then watch through the rest of the day, and there's now a second piece to be keeping an eye on. And this is one I'm going to be watching carefully. Notice the next frontal boundary coming into the Pacific Northwest, while this low continues to curl up here in the central United States. So by 6 o'clock tonight, we now have, again, two different areas where we could be seeing those stronger storms coming through, the greater risk down here from Texas into Arkansas and Missouri. But this is tonight at 7, and we'll play through the overnight hours. And we're going to stretch this out all the way to Friday morning. So the frontal boundary snaking through the eastern Corn Belt, leaving some of its rain and storms down here farther to the south in the mid-south. And then as we play through Friday, that wave we talked about that came in is going to be pushing some snow into the Four Corner States, specifically Colorado. Now, I mentioned the Four Corner States because into next week, we're going to watch these states carefully. If you remember, one of the most important things we talked about to returning moisture to the Central Plains is to get a trough in this area. That is what can take that dry line, which we saw was way over here, and pull it back, bringing moisture with it. We're going to be watching for that very carefully. And the wave that might make all of that happen is here. It's actually a pretty complicated setup. There's multiple pieces in the flow of the jet stream right now that have to come together to make this, but I'm watching this wave right here very carefully because of this. Here's the forecast of these troughs. Now keep an eye right here, all right? As we play forward, that trough moved up toward the Aleutian Islands, while the big one, the one we're talking about right now, moved here. Remember how I showed you more precip coming to the Pacific Northwest? That's the trough associated with this one. Okay, as we play forward, it didn't look like much, but that trough is now sitting here, and it's getting some reinforcement from a trough that's trying to come out of parts of the Canadian archipelago over to Alaska. Now that, then by next Monday night into Tuesday, sits there. And if this occurs like this will take that dry line and pull it back to the west. Watch. Here's today's dry line. And this is a dew point temperature map. So here's the drier, cooler air coming in behind this system. This is for Saturday into Sunday. So that's the dry, cold air behind the first low. But the thing's going to rebound. The Gulf is going to reopen. This is now getting into Monday. See it? And going out there until Tuesday. In fact, let's just stop this on Tuesday night. The dry line is here. And this is higher dew point air getting pulled into this region. We're talking about early next week. And what I'm excited to see here is that this could finally deliver some precipitation into this area. So let's go have a look at it. Let's compare our models, GFS versus the European, play this forward. So here's the first low. We've talked a lot about it. It's going to curl up in toward the Hudson Bay right there by Sunday, and a lot of cold air coming in behind this. We then watched, to go back here, watched the next frontal boundary coming into the Pacific Northwest, putting snow into the northern Rockies, bringing in some colder air. But the wave we're going to watch is on Sunday night. You can't see it. It's in the upper level, so it's not going to be reflected on the surface map, but it's here. And this is Sunday night into Monday morning. And then right here, next Tuesday morning, Tuesday midday, notice how the European model, it's also reflected in the GFS, is attempting to return for the first time in a very long time meaningful rain to parts of Kansas, eastern Colorado, Oklahoma, and Texas. And we featured this in yesterday's report. And it could be a multi-day event midweek next week before this low finally curls on out of here toward the mid-Atlantic, adding more rain. And we're going to have to watch to see if it's followed up by a second system that is in both models by next Thursday. I mean, this is absolutely critical to this. So I wanted to examine it in terms of ensemble performance. So when you look over the next 10 days, this map is now showing the probability of getting at least an inch of liquid. We're always cautious with this because we know that in times of drought, often the signs of precipitation fail. So what we're seeing here, though, is that right now this is aided by last night's precipitation, overnight precip. But we are seeing the probability of precipitation increasing in Oklahoma and Kansas and Colorado. All right. From there, let's talk about what the snowfall is going to look like, because we've already discussed this. But with that deeper trough coming in, I'm just going to take this out there and park it by Wednesday. You notice that you get this axis of snow from the Cascades through the Rockies. That's going to add quite a bit more to the Rockies right now, which is important just for the water picture in this area. But from here, we better talk about what these temperatures are going to do. Here's Thursday's highs. Remember the color shadings compared to normal. You see the much colder air occupying the central United States while the warmth spreads east. They're going to watch a cold weekend for the central U.S., spreading toward the east on Sunday. This is now getting into Monday. We know that we're expecting mild conditions to develop across the west. And the reason for that, this ridge. So this is all next week, a ridge opening up in the west. See it there? And that ridge that opens up is going to finally deliver some mild air into this region while the eastern half of the country kind of endures a longer go of colder air. And that's why when we look at the next 7 days of accumulated growing degree day units, we notice that much of the northern tier of the United States is collecting none. And throughout the Corn Belt and through here, there's just going to be a pause on the speed at which this crop, whatever of it's planted right now, is going to continue to mature here. So next, let's talk about when we have risk of frost. So I'm just going to take you out there. Let's start off first on Friday morning. We see the line right in through here. Just quickly step through this day by day. There's Saturday morning, so just keep an eye on the hard contour boundary here. And we go into Sunday morning. We see that getting down into Missouri and Kansas. We then get into Monday morning, again through parts of Illinois and Indiana. We then get into Tuesday morning next week. Whoops, right there. And then we're going to watch this next system come out, which is going to bring in some more mild air next Wednesday and Thursday. But we just need to keep a close eye on where these temperatures are going to drop of frost. Bigger picture, though, take a look. 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. The cold moves east. The mild conditions try to return to the west. And the good news is that once we get out here into the beginning of May, there seems to be a push of this getting out and east, and honestly more mild conditions probably coming in across much of the United States. There's some good signals out here. We'll talk again tonight in the in-depth report. Okay, last thing I wanted to show you here today, just to complement this, was the CPC forecast. You notice that they're also reflecting the pattern we're expecting here over the week 2 time period. And then let's talk quickly about what's going on in South America. We've seen the models kind of expand the area that's going to be drier in southern Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. We notice it's still in Mato Grosso to Goiás over toward Minas Gerais, still wetter. But remember, though, this area just had a lot of rain that came through, so not a major concern. And when we look, though, this morning, one of our bigger concerns was that we were concerned about maybe Paraná getting down toward Santa Catarina and Rio Grande do Sul of a frost. You can actually see the icon here from the National Weather Service out of Brazil. And this morning, some of this area is dipping down into those single digits degrees Celsius. So we're going to watch out for what that could mean. There could be some patchy frost here and in and around Buenos Aires. So I appreciate it. We'll talk again tomorrow. Thanks.